if I struggle with boundaries with myself, I'm going to struggle with boundaries in external relationships. So we started with me and me, and then the next week we did family of origin. And I have a note that I want to throw something else in there for Bob before we finish this topic. But today I wanted to talk about boundaries in coupleship. Doesn't matter if you're married, dating, just starting, divorced and got back together on your 25th anniversary. Doesn't matter. We're going to talk about all the things. So, boundaries within a coupleship is really hard to talk about without talking about boundaries between me and the boundaries that were modeled for me. So I want you to think back to your family of origin. I want you to think back to what was modeled for you. And don't do this, I'm being sarcastic. But raise your hand if you saw the most perfect boundaries, super healthy, in your family of origin from childhood. I haven't met anybody yet, so I'm just saying. And all childhoods are not terrible either. All childhoods aren't bad. There's a lot of people that we work with, fellow travelers that I've supported and that have supported me, that it's less about what happened to them and more about what didn't happen. So when you're thinking about, my childhood was fine, it was good. Yes, I believe you. And because perfection doesn't exist, that's not realistic. Usually there is an unmet emotional need. There's an unmet need somewhere in there. And being able to recognize that is really hard, because for many of us, especially in my program, which is ACA, Adult Child of Alcoholic and Dysfunctional Families, you don't have to come from an addicted family to qualify. There is also a disordered attachment. So there was something that happened in childhood that doesn't have to be mom or dad's fault. This is not about blame and fault. This is about fact. So when you're thinking about your parents or your caretakers or your loved ones that modeled for you what a coupleship should look like, I want you to think about what you saw. Was there physical affection? Was there verbalization of love? Did you ever even hear or see either one of those? Or was there a discrepancy or a contradiction? You say you love her or him, and then you turn around and you cuss them out. Or you never buy her a Christmas present. Or you forget his birthday. Was there any confusion around boundaries that you witnessed between couples? Were you raised in a home that wasn't okay with same-sex couples or interracial couples? Was there confusion around what was okay and what was not, and then there was discrepancies or just shit that didn't add up? Maybe they weren't the correct religion or whatever those issues or challenges are. Noticing what showed up for you and noticing what it felt like. So when you do grow up in a home of dysfunction, let me speak in I. When I grew up in a home of dysfunction, I witnessed a shit ton of those discrepancies. They would fight, it would be the cycle. My dad would be mean. My mom would withdraw, pull away. They wouldn't talk for days. He would apologize and buy her things or take her to dinner. And then eventually I would see him talking again. Then my dad would get inappropriate again because he was drinking or using opiates, and it would start all over again. It was a vicious cycle. My dad also objectified women all the time, had many girlfriends. And it was really confusing how all of that could happen, but yet he would say he loved her and he couldn't live without her. What I didn't know was I was witnessing codependency, where there's lots of discrepancies, like saying one thing and doing another. And what I also saw was the dualism or the polarization, the good, the bad, the all, the nothing, the secrets or the full transparency. Tell them everything. And what we've talked about with that polarized thinking or that polarization is usually what happens is it's a trauma response. I was raised this way, and so I'm going to do this. Because I'm thinking in my head, well, this was terrible or shitty or not good enough. And so I'm just going to swing my pendulum all the way over here, and I'm going to do the exact opposite, thinking that that's what's going to make me healthier, thinking I won't become my mom. Well, I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you have already heard this story. When we're talking about boundaries with spouses, I need to tell you how mine started out, because it sure as hell doesn't look like it looks right now. So I come from a pretty abusive home. My mom is, in Webster Dictionary by codependency. My dad used many process and substances, and just really confused by what any type of relationship would look like. It just looked like it was supposed to be good and then bad, and I was supposed to do something to fix it. And as long as I was good and doing the best I can, then he'll just love me. Well, when my husband and I first started dating, I was sick as shit. He was sick as shit and using. And I just thought that I was going to save him. Like, by golly, I didn't save my dad, couldn't save my dad, but I was going to save him. And I made sure he went to detox, and I made sure he went to NA meetings, good 6 to 8 months. And the guys in there would say, come on, Miss Amber, if you're going to drive him here, you're going to sit here and participate. I grew up in the country, okay, so that accent's very appropriate. And so I did. And not only did NA save his life, but NA saved my life. Realizing that I was doing the opposite. Okay, if he kept secrets from me, then I would take him everywhere. He kept secrets from me, then I would hold on to his bank card and make sure he didn't have any money to buy any drugs. He'd turn off his little location thing on his app on his phone. Okay, I'd follow him. His addiction became our addiction because I became addicted to saving him. I wanted to know where his money was. I wanted to know where he was. By golly, I was going to shut off all access, and I wasn't losing this one. And if you know me, you know I can be pretty committed. Yeah. And I've been through a few therapists. So what I learned in ACA was what was getting in my way of connection was my codependency, but it was also my trauma response. Everything I was walking out with my husband was my trauma story from my dad. He suffered a lot. He was an ACA, and that didn't exist back then. My mom did too, and is. But my dad lost my mom, and he couldn't come back from that. So he ended his story for himself because he didn't want to live without her. And I found myself in the exact same situation because my husband, at the time, boyfriend, also overdosed. And I found him. And swing opposite end of the pendulum. Can you guys even imagine? I know this is scary to hear, and I've done a shit ton of work on it. So if I'm being me, that's why I don't ever talk about something I haven't worked on. And I found myself in the same story. I was repeating the cycle again. I was swinging the pendulum every time he relapsed and something happened to him. And you guys can probably only imagine what my therapists were saying to me and what I was saying back. But I finally got it with ACA because what I realized is Chad wasn't the problem. My own trauma was unintentionally getting re-triggered and re-traumatized in my current story. And that has so much to do with why our treatment model looks the way it does. Because there's not one couple that comes to work that finds me or my team and comes to work with us because somebody's a problem. That's just not how it plays out. That's not how it works. If someone else's story is invading me, it's projecting onto me, or it's violating me, and somehow that's because it already exists here. That's because it's already a part of my backstory. I may not know it because maybe it showed up different for me. And maybe my dad was the one that had the alcoholic parent, and my dad was the workaholic. So there was no alcohol. But the reality is, it's not about the alcohol. It's not about the pills. Addiction is rooted in trauma. And when trauma isn't healed or repaired, it is a vicious cycle. So the way that we step out of that vicious cycle and we stop generational patterns are things like boundaries. Boundaries help me come out of the pendulum, because it doesn't matter which side of this I'm on, I'm still in a trauma response. When I can find my way to the center, to what works for me, it was never having my husband text me as soon as he got to work. It wasn't. It was never me looking at the bank account 5 times a day. It wasn't. Because there was nothing I could see from his full transparency that would ever make up for what I experienced. What I was doing was controlling. I was controlling and grasping at anything I could do to make sure my story didn't repeat. But I was focused in the wrong place. I was focused out here and on him, where I don't have any power and control. And I'm spinning my wheels, running in the hamster wheel. Where I do have influence and control in here, I didn't even know her. I really never even met her. So being able to do inner child work, which allows us to integrate my story, allows me to become whole and be authentic, allows me to have boundaries like, honey, I know what I'm asking is a lot. And today I'm just really anxious about everything that's going on. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to text me when you got there. That question has to be willing to receive a yes or a no. Anytime I am not willing to receive that from a request, I'm controlling. And controlling is not connection. There's nothing about that that is getting me what I want or what I need as a human. So when we're looking at boundaries, we're looking at 2 people that are willing to participate in an agreement. And I'm also looking at being willing to accept a no if that's what's offered to me. So when we go from having secrets and it hurts and it damages the relationship to full transparency, there's a lot of controlling behaviors that come out of that. There's a lot of separations that come out of that. I'm going to close down the bank accounts. I'm going to withdraw all the money so you can't go see your therapist if you want to. Those behaviors are not coming from a logical place. Those behaviors are coming from a trauma response. It's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, trying to stay alive. There's no logic in them whatsoever. So being able to get back to a place that's amicable, that's connected, that co-parenting is possible, requires individual work alongside coupleship work. And if you work with my team, you already know that, because that's how we walk it out. But I wanted to be able to talk a little bit more about boundaries and to apply some real life examples of, it really is the codependency that I'm doing all the wrong things for the right reasons, and it never gets me where I'm trying to go. So being able to process with somebody outside of my story what I need so that I can feel safe and stay connected to my partner isn't something me and my partner are going to be able to do alone. And it's usually something that I have to do here first. If my body resists a relationship, it's sending me a message. If I have to force myself to see someone and I don't really want to see them, it's sending me a message.
Mm.
Relationships can be rooted in trauma.
Oh, yeah.
And when there's no connection and there's only trauma bonding becomes the only thing that connects us. So, in reference to Bob's statement last week around family of origin, what happens when we don't see them? Or when we do see them, we don't really want to. Sometimes that happens in coupleships. Sometimes we get to a place where it's like, why? And I say frequently, my husband even knows this, my marriage is the hardest thing outside of being a mom. It's the hardest thing for me because I'm walking out something totally different than I ever witnessed and that I've ever experienced. Because what it requires me to do is not focus on him. And I'm a recovering codependent. I focus on everybody but me, or that's why I'd rather focus. So being able to find out what's happening for me and about me, what brings most couples, I was this client too. What brings most couples into couples counseling is we need to communicate better. Yep, you're right about that. But what's the root problem? Well, we're so in it that we can't articulate the root problem because we've gotten to the point that we're already, our prefrontal cortex is off, amygdala is on, and we're surviving. We're numbing and medicating because we're surviving because we don't know what else to do. It would be similar to somebody who's not a great swimmer swimming without a raft, flailing around, and I ask them, do you want Chick-fil-A or Bojangles? They can't answer that fucking question because that part of their brain ain't even on. I know that's a silly example, but that's how I had to start understanding what was happening in my brain. What was happening to my pathology that I couldn't even tell you. We're not fighting about the laundry? No, you're not fighting about the fucking laundry. Because if you were, you would have fixed that like 15 times ago. So when couples say, I want to communicate better, that's like me cutting the weed with scissors above the ground. Yes, that is a problem. I'm not saying that's not a problem. And in order to feel, we got to heal. The way that we develop boundaries and come out of the all or nothing to find the gray area, I have to feel that. There is absolutely nothing about that that's cognitive. Nothing. I feel who I want to be around and who I want in my life, how close I want them or how far I want them away. That's a feeling to know where to put that boundary. And in order to feel, I have to heal. But if I'm surviving, I got to stabilize first. My nervous system can't be through the roof, which is why if you work with my team, we're trying to pull you away from focusing on each other to refocus back on self. Much like when you get on the airplane, where do you put the oxygen mask first? I can't help anyone else if I'm not okay. And if my prefrontal cortex is off and my amygdala is on, by the way, what this looks like in surviving is taking his keys, checking the bank account, finding out where he is. That's the codependent. That is surviving. But the problem with that is that becomes my addiction, and that's how I'm numbing and medicating. And it's not getting me anywhere I want to go. I want to be healthier. I want to feel connected. I want to feel joy. But what that is doing by not even having access to my prefrontal cortex, prefrontal cortex is logic, analyzing, and decision making. Amygdala is fight, flight, freeze, fawn. When one is on, the other is off. So I need access to my logic to know I can't find out where he is 24/7. I got 2 kids, a job. So I want to offer you this, and this is for individual. This is for me and me. This is not for him or her over there and what they're doing. I don't have any control over that. When I keep secrets, I am in my pathology. When I keep secrets, I am in my pathology. Something in my body is telling me it's not safe. It's distorted because I think that secret is safer here and showing up dishonest in my relationship. Do you hear any logic in that whatsoever? That's why I said I'm in pathology. That's for me and me. That is not me judging somebody else's pathology. I don't have any control over that. And when I try to control someone else's program, guess who isn't controlling their program? My husband. He didn't have to do nothing. I drove him everywhere. I paid for the gas. I had the car. He didn't have to do nothing. When I'm not suffering consequences from my actions, I'm not going to change my behavior. That's not addiction definition. That's human behavior. When I'm suffering consequences because I'm not taking my cholesterol medicine or my blood pressure medicine and I feel yucky, oh, I should probably take my medicine. That's a consequence. So when someone else is figuring out all the consequences for me, I got no reason to change anything. But as soon as I make my program my priority, then all of a sudden that person has to figure out their program. Because when I take over, what I'm telling them is I'm your higher power and I don't trust you to do it. And you know what? I don't want to worry about mine. Yeah. Because it's usually what we witness. So the tool with that I want to offer you is control does not get me connection. When I'm using healthy boundaries, I am not in an emotional state. Several of you, Amy said, they're getting so much easier because they make sense. My prefrontal cortex is on. They're logical, right? It doesn't matter if they're not logical to the other person. That just means they're no longer benefiting from my codependency. But control does not equal connection. Secrets does equal pathology. So as you're navigating things, if I notice, let me speak in the eye, I'm hiding Amazon boxes, I probably should have a conversation with my husband. Or if I put expenses on a credit card instead of on the debit card, I probably should have a conversation. And that may have nothing to do with him. That may have everything to do with me.